future generations. And I'm as concerned as anybody else in this meeting about the effects of climate change. It's a global emergency and every country can contribute towards addressing it. But how should Auckland tackle this and fund this? As to putting the rates up and adding another tax, I think it's time for the Mayor to realise that people are losing their businesses, their homes, their jobs, they're struggling to pay their rent, their mortgages, even feed their children. So it's not the time to be reaching for ever deeper into ratepayers' pockets, Madam Chair. It's exactly the wrong time. It's, in fact, the worst time for council to be increasing taxes. Why would council now suddenly support a new tax at this time after the worst lockdown in our history with even harsher economic impacts compared to last year? And that includes a rural community who would be being asked to pay more tax but not receiving any direct benefit. So what I'm proposing, climate change prevention should be part of Auckland Council's everyday business as usual practices. In fact, all that the proposed climate action tax will do is paying for business as usual projects such as buses, cycleways, electric ferries and some tree planting. This is all business as usual stuff. They are projects that should be funded from within the existing budgets in the general rate take. Thus, I support the $150 million already budgeted in the 10-year budget for tackling climate change. Aucklanders also pay an additional regional fuel tax, let's not forget, to help deliver these types of projects. The council needs to stop double dipping. We've heard that Aucklanders want climate change addressed and they want their public transport systems improved. However, Aucklanders expect this should be part of council's business as usual, not an opportunity to tax them. And if you think I'm wrong, let's just simply test it, support this amendment, and let's find out if the Aucklanders would prefer delivery from an alternative funding source of the general rates and within the existing 10-year budgets. The proposed 5.9% rate hike is a broken promise from the Mayor. As the Mayor indicated, the Liberal elite who sit around this table are insulated from this tax increase. The hypocrisy is that they say that they defend the most vulnerable. They are prepared to vote in more and more taxes upon the Aucklanders they represent. The new climate action tax will mean next year's overall rate take hike will be 5.9%, even higher than last year's promised 1.5% increase. But the most critical question will be, will the climate action targeted rate actually help reduce emissions, or is it really a way of bringing forward already planned for projects? And I'd ask this of the press gallery. The question that needs answering is, will the climate action tax and its associated projects actually reduce overall net emissions, given that the emissions trading scheme is now capped? And this seems to be receiving very little media coverage. Transport emissions are already capped under the New Zealand's trading scheme. That means emissions saved from going from diesel to electric ferries, for example, will only free up carbon credits for emissions to be produced elsewhere in New Zealand. So overall, while Aucklanders are asked to pay more, the country's no better off. The idea of a climate change tax to me is a Ponzi scheme. Another example is the largest chunk of the spend in the proposal is $228 million on walking and cycle paths. That won't help overall emission reductions. It may have other benefits, such as reducing traffic congestion, but it can't lower total emissions, which is the only thing that matters when it comes back to what will actually combat climate change. Let's call this tax what it really is. It's a disguised rate hike. It's a disguised rate hike to fill in Auckland Council's whole financial hole left from COVID. So look, just to conclude, the climate action tax is simply a way of filling a hole in the Auckland Council's bank account caused by COVID. And it's time for the council to tighten its belt and cut operational spending and reprioritise spending priorities within existing budgets. This administration believes it will be leaving a legacy of the biggest cost savings ever. It believes it will be leaving a legacy to grandchildren, future generations, about dealing with climate change. It's actually leaving a legacy of taxing more, borrowing more, and creating more debt for our grandchildren, a bigger burden upon them than ever before. Half of the fuel tax collected is unspent. It's been used to prop up debt and fund operational costs. As I said, look, I'm concerned about climate change as much as anyone else. Look, and look, even the planting of $13.3 million worth of trees is frivolous spending. It's mitigation. It does nothing to reduce the production of pollution. Raising money for mitigation is just deferring a problem, not dealing with it. So funding from the general rates would mean avoidance of the 2.4% target rate increase, but it would require reprioritisation of Auckland's 10-year capital spending priorities, along with cutting operational costs. So because time is tight, I think I should probably speak directly to the wording, Madam Chair. So the wording specifically refers to, with the reprioritisation of capital and operational budgets over the next decade. This is to encapsulate all of Council's funding levers beyond just the general rates, those being operational savings, debt levels and asset sales and those type of things. The amendment also says, and other funding tools. The climate change program doesn't have to be continuously supported by rate increases. There are alternative revenue streams other than rates available, and these take pressure off ratepayers. And I think the Councillor Walker spoke to someone, as the Mayor spoke to, there are other revenue streams. Today isn't about trying to define what might need to be deferred or dropped from the 10-year budget if Council wants to put more into the climate change program. But if we got the message from Aucklanders that they prefer to fund the climate change program from the general rates rather than a new climate change tax, then we would need to have the courage to make tough calls about what Council's core business is and what Council can actually afford. So to quickly finish, this amendment is simply giving Aucklanders visibility that there is another way to fund climate change. Why wouldn't we let them know that? Why would we not ask for their opinion on an alternative option, Madam Chair? I would like to hear from the people of Auckland if they would support funding climate change through the general rates rather than the new climate change tax. But it is but as it currently stands, that isn't in the Mayor's proposal. It's silent on that. So, fellow councillors, I'd ask that you support this, and ISB members, I'd ask that you support this amendment and give the opportunity to Aucklanders to feedback to you if they generally feel climate change and that it should be funded from general rates and through existing budgets as business as usual, or would they rather prefer that it's from an additional climate change a targeted rate. So I would like to commend this amendment to you, colleagues, and ask that you support it to be added as an addition support of the Mayor's proposal. Okay, I hope that was 5 minutes, Madam Chair. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor. Look, what I've got is some questions from other councillors as to your amendment. And the first question is to you from Councillor Hills, then Councillor Henderson, and then the Deputy Mayor. So, Councillor Hills, you're first.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess, as always has been in my experience, that if an amendment is put up, especially at this point, that wasn't raised previously, we need to provide where the money is going to come from. So I do need to know what the mover is willing, where is the $1 billion coming from, and what operational and capital budgets is he...
Point of order, Madam Chair. Sorry to interrupt.
I've got a point of order from Councillor Watson.
So Councillor Watson here, and point of order, I'm just looking at section 1.5 in our standing orders that go to amendments. Although there has been a practice where people moving amendments have been questioned, the debate has started. And at any rate, there's no requirement from a mover of amendment to answer questions. And I would suggest that in instance, the questions that are being raised here are debating points and should be brought up in the debate. So I just think the debate has started. It should proceed, Madam Chair, or otherwise we get into this situation where debating points are being used as question where they should be addressed by members in their speech. And that's what's reflected in standing orders. Thank you.
I'll take that then. So, Councillor Hills, do you want to take your time then to speak?
Madam Chair, could I just have a ruling on that? It has always been the case that we were able to, if we are supposed to be voting on something, I can't possibly vote on something I don't have information for. So, in the past,
clarification, please.
We've got 5 guys remaining.
Thank you, Madam Chair. That is correct. Previous meetings, we have allowed questions for clarification. So it would be your ruling, Madam Chair, whether you accepted a clarification question or, as was said, basically to allow the comments to be made and not have questions.
I think it would be most unfortunate if we broke practice at this particular time, bearing the importance of this matter. So I will move that you can ask your questions. If you are going to vote on the amendment, I believe that you should have the confidence to know, have all your questions answered first. And I'm sure the mover can provide that. So I will go back to Councillor Hills and we'll...
Thank you, Madam Chair, for that call of keeping the practice we've had in place. So yes, Councillor Sayers, so just where is the $1 billion coming from? Because I would have to have confidence, especially through a submission process when we're asking the public to have a fair understanding of what they are submitting on. Where would the $1 billion come from? What operations and capital budgets would you be cutting to allow that $1 billion of public transport, walking, cycling, tree planting?
Through you, Madam Chair, thank you, Councillor Hills, for your question. And look, I hope you will support this in terms of just adding it into the as another option for us to take feedback on. That's all I'm asking for. In terms of like the recommendation, I just listened to the Mayor's presentation and asked a question this morning and decided to put this up, Councillor. So what I'd like to signal is that it talks about reprioritisation. So we'd have to work through that. Hopefully, I mentioned in my words, I can't remember everything that in the order in which I said things was, if I reflect back to what the Mayor said a bit earlier, we've given the mandate to the Chief Executive Officer to go away and come back with like how we can cut our cloth to fit our budget. Depending on if we as a group decided that the feedback that we got from this was worth exploring, adding that into that exercise, then we would, Richard. So I can't tell you, sit here right now and say it's coming from X, Y, and Z. We'd have to get that information prepared, presented to us. So I understand your concern about that might be missing from the paper going out. Yeah. And I'd hope that the way that we would frame it is that it would be, if we have to cut our cloth to fit our budgets, and if you felt that there was overwhelming support to do it that way, then we could. If not, we wouldn't. So so Richard, I can't tell you exactly where, but I can tell you that's how I would predict that's how it would.
Okay, and just my second question, Madam Chair, your comments on the ETS, Greg, under the new cap that has been placed by this government, so we still have to dramatically reduce emissions even with the carbon credits. So don't know if you have been quite got that right, but I guess in terms of what did you mean under the new cap? Because the new cap forces us to reduce our emissions quite dramatically even without the carbon credit. So just want to understand your comments on that.
Okay, Richard. Hopefully this helps. I understand there's even a sinking lid on it, Councillor Hills. It's being pressed down. So what I'm saying is that really that's a government initiative. It's forcing to happen at a government level for us, and the whole purpose of it was to take that burden off local government to produce them. So it's going to happen by 2050 that we should be down to net zero emissions. So if Auckland pushes down on one side, it's going to be bouncing out somewhere else. So the overall emissions don't decrease for the country. So I think my point was that it should be business as usual. I mean, in all our papers, we have a climate change section. We've got your committee. all the work programs through Healthy Waters, Auckland Transport, whatever projects go through, they get analysed for business as usual to address climate change. We're doing it in a bigger and bigger way, and all I'm saying is we should continue that to reach that objective rather than bringing another revenue stream through taxing ratepayers to do that.
Thank you, Greg.
Thank you, Councillor. Deputy Mayor, did you have a comment or is it a question? Deputy Mayor?
Yeah, sorry, mine's a comment, Madam Chair.
Okay, I'll leave you for comments. Councillor Filipaina, Patai.
Thank you, Chair. Just to our officers, I'm assuming we can ask our officers a question in regards to this amendment.
Yes, you can.
So to our officers, in regards to this amendment, for what we would get from a targeted rate, how much would the general rate have to be increased? My understanding could be increased from our indicative LTP to maybe 2.4%.
Hi, it's Andrew Duncan here. Yes, that is correct, Councillor Filipaina.
Okay, so thank you, Chair. I just wanted to know whether that's what the mover and the seconder are putting on for consultation, that the general rate gets increased by 2.4 on top of the 3.5. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. My next question is in the name of Councillor Dalton.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Sayers. My question was just around the other funding tools. My concern around the budget is more around years 24, 25, 23 possibly. And so what we do now will have impact on that. Now, you've spoken about other funding tools. We've talked about congestion charging in the time frame, and we've talked about airport shares in this term. But what are the other funding tools? Because I'd need to understand that, how that's going to work to fund, because you're not talking about an increase to the general rate, are you? You're saying let's do it within the rate that we've got now and other funding tools. So what might they be?
Thank you, Councillor Dalton, for your question. I also hope you might support this as well, if I can answer your question well enough. The alternative revenue streams, or those funding tools, the idea of that is to take pressure off ratepayers, and they include alternative revenue streams in my mind that I'm aware of, that I can answer your question with, around the regional fuel tax, a carbon credit, perhaps green bonds. And as the Mayor spoke to, a lot of those are government orientated funding tools, so we would have to advocate for some of this. And importantly, there may be even new revenue streams. We haven't asked a pool of talent out there, being our ratepayers, about what their ideas are, initiatives, innovations. We've actually pre-decided that in this paper. So I would hope that we would go out and beyond what I've just spoken about, and there are some others as well, that there may be initiatives from Aucklanders and the talent and research teams out there that might offer new ones, Councillor Dalton, ones that we're not even thinking about at the moment.
Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you for the question.
Thank you. Councillor Newman, and then His Worship the Mayor.
Oh, look, thank you, Greg. Look, I don't want to use questions to try and batter down your arguments, because that's not something I'd be comfortable doing. But my issue is, and I personally don't have an issue with increasing the general rates to fund what is, in my view, an appropriate level of service, as opposed to a targeted rate for a radical suite of activities. But my question, I suppose, is that if we're using the general rate to fund new activities, my great concern, obviously, is meeting the operational cost of councils through the renewals program. Would you foresee that the renewals budget and the need to fund for the depreciation of existing assets could be compromised if we were to fund the climate action program through the general rate with no further adjustment to the general rate to reflect the increase expectation of how the general rate money will be spent, and if so, what is the risk for the renewals program under this model? Thank you, Greg.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Dan Newman. A very good question, and I guess my thinking around that is like everything could be a compromise. That's the reality of it. We'd be going back and looking at what are our priorities. Along with you, I've stood by your side in terms of the importance of the renewals program and getting towards that 100% depreciation. We wanted to retain that, and I'd be keen to retain that. Other things would have to be examined and cut, deferred. Some other recommendation come through from our chief executive about how we balance the books at the end of the day and what stays and what might have to go.
Okay, Councillor Newman.
Yeah, it's not. Sorry, Greg. It's a no from me, but I appreciate the consideration.
Thank you, Councillor. His Worship the Mayor, you have a question.
No, mine's a comment, Madam Chair, so I'll wait for comments. Thank you.
Councillor Fletcher, do you have a question? Yes, you do.
Yes, I do. In reading this amendment, which is by way of addition, not substitution, as I see it, you're not, Greg, Councillor Sayers, proposing a cap on general rates, as I see it. So what I'm trying to understand is it's a good thing to go up for consultation, and it's a good thing that you give the public as wide a scope as possible on something that I think the majority of people agree with. But does this then enable the consultation to include those who would prefer a general rate increase if that was required vis-a-vis a targeted rate? Is that the thinking behind it?
Thank you for the question, Councillor Fletcher, and I'd hope that you might also support this amendment because the answer on satisfaction of my reply to you, my recommendation is not seeking to seek that feedback. It's specifically seeking to feedback to remain within the current fiscal envelope of and deliver our any climate initiative programs, work programs through the existing budgets. And what I'm trying to emphasise is that we should be able to do that if we continue the terrific practices that we already are learning to do about treating climate change as business as usual.
But just so I understand, that if it went out for consultation, which is what we're discussing at the moment, it would give the public the opportunity to support a targeted rate or otherwise. But I mean, what I am loath to see is people just throwing out climate change mitigation. It's just the vehicle, I guess, that is used to deliver it with the most integrity. So, yeah, if you want to comment further on that, that would help me make my decision as to what I do.
Thank you, Councillor Fletcher. It's we all want to see the climate change. I'll try and answer it best that I can, Councillor. I don't know if I fully understand the question, so if I haven't got it right in terms of addressing it, please let me know. But I'm not sure how to. Look, if the question goes out there as per the resolution, the amendment, and which is just complementary to what the Mayor's trying to put out, look, people can create any other feedback that they want around it in terms of if they want a general rate increase or not. What I'm saying is that now's not the time to be dipping further and deeper into ratepayers' pockets either way. I imagine there's going to be general comments sections in the feedback documentation, as there always is. People could express preferences. It might make them think about it, it might make them consider is that another option, but that is not the intention of this amendment.
Okay, Councillor. But before I go to comments, I'm just going to ask you a question myself, Councillor. So, because I'm not quite 100% sure of your amendment as well. So, if we go out for consultation on the climate change and it's a targeted rate, Aucklanders can say yes, and Aucklanders could say no. All right. If you put up your amendment, you're saying there is an option for us to address climate change as we are now, i.e. the 150 million that went in the recovery budget as part of the general rate and the work that we are doing. But you're saying that there be an option provided for the consultation for the climate change program. So we know what the program is. The Mayor's outlined what the program is. It's about $1 billion. And that can be funded through the general rate. So my question, and other funding tools, my question to you is, how do you take all that money off our operational expenditure and still pay for all the things that we're supposed to be doing? Because quite frankly, Greg, climate change aside, our biggest problem is actually what we can fund within the general rate. So you're pulling out of the general rate, the whole climate action program, it won't leave much else. So wouldn't you be better just going yes or no on the climate change targeted rate? You want to pull out $1 billion out of the general rate. Is that correct? Is that what you want to do?
Well, what I want to do is, if people agree with the work program, they have the choice whether it's through the targeted rate, but also through this amendment expressing if they want it to come out of the current budgets, as you're alluding to. Now, it's probably about $500 million we're talking about, right? Because the other half is government elsewhere, right? So, and it may be when, as I addressed with Councillor Hill's question, when the Chief Executive have to work through this, are there other ways of addressing this? Are there smarter ways of delivering through business as usual? Is it going to cost that much? And are there other revenue? What we're alluding to there, and other funding tools, are there other ways of doing this in a smarter way? I understand what your concern is. I mean, you work very hard on these budgets, you understand them inside out, but I think the public needs to know that there is another way of doing this. They might not agree with it, and they can be, all the pros and cons obviously would be outlined in the paper, I suspect, and let's get the feedback.
Okay, I just have to ask my next question then to our Chief Financial Officer. Peter, if we took the 574 million over 10 years out of the general rate, would we balance a budget?
Thank you, Chair. I have been considering this since the amendment has been coming up. And the first point, I guess, is this targeted rate doesn't fill a hole caused by COVID. It is targeted towards that new spend and is ring-fenced for that new spend. So to achieve a balanced budget, you would have to find operational cuts, reductions, and we already know that the operational savings targets within this year is 90 and ongoing is 90, and that there are further reprioritisation frameworks that are in the Mayoral Proposal to be consulted on that will lead to reductions not next year but the year after and the year after that. To go out to consultation on a without knowing the consequences of that cut on the service levels and OPEX would not, I think, allow for an informed position to be taken in that consultation. And without having identified a funding stream for that, it would increase the pressure on the operating position and our call on debt. Increasing debt would be imprudent in my professional position at this time. I would also mention the green bonds. It's come up a couple of times. We're doing really well in that space and continue to push that space. It is more of a funding tool than a financing tool. It's part of our borrowing set, which we have to pay back. But we are over $1 billion in that scheme now, and it's going really well. So my balanced answer, I guess, Chair, is without understanding where the funding or cost reductions would come from, it does look like it would put call on debt, which is already at levels we want to reduce. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Councillors, I have no further questions, I don't think, so I will move now to comment, and I have comments from Councillor Cashmore, Henderson, the Mayor, and Councillor Watson. Councillor Cashmore, you first.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I understand what Councillor Sayers is trying to achieve. Basically, we'd have to reprioritise $58 million a year out of existing budgets. We already know how stretched that is. And I also think, Madam Chair, with all due respect to you, you actually nailed it when you said, because people who vote, if they don't like the idea of a climate change target rate, they just put in their comments form no, or find it from somewhere else. So what's actually been asked for here by Councillor Sayers is actually probably going to be included indirectly in the consultation documents. Do you support a climate action targeted rate? They could write no and explain their reasons. So I think there's a surplus to requirements, and the probability of trying to find the additional $58 million a year over 10 years out of existing budgets would be highly problematic. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Whakaaro, Councillor Henderson, Deputy Chair.
Yes, thanks. I wish to speak against this, and with all due respect, but if it's addressed through the general rate, you're losing the benefit of a targeted rate, which is a ring-fenced fund that you're going to the community and saying, we've collected this off you, it's clearly defined, and we have to legally spend it on the money that we've asked for. Reaching deeper into the pocket to the ratepayer will be exactly what is needed if you're folding this into the general rate. And with respect, I do disagree with the view that we shouldn't be identifying cuts at this stage. I think we should, as part of this conversation, if we want to pass it. The onus is on those that say we should just reprioritise our existing spend to define what we should be cutting, so that we can be open with Aucklanders. What current public service should be cut or lowered? In a pandemic, what service can't Aucklanders rely on to be there? I have to say I do take exception to the comments about being called a liberal elite, being called a hypocrite. Those hardest hit by climate change are the poorest areas of our city. The loudest voices in my ward are in the Pacific community. They're seeing their homes go underwater. They won't appreciate those that are trying to raise awareness and work on their plight being called such things. And if we're talking about finance, I'll also remind all of us of the amount of savings that have been made over this term already, the work on value for money that has been done. I think there is an easy way to address the concerns that are within this amendment, and it's exactly as the Deputy Mayor has said. Put the targeted rate out for consultation as in the proposal. Let the ratepayer tell us that we want you to cut this and that in favour of funding the work. The other thing I'll just alert councillors to the fact is that if we're getting less revenue in, this also means less debt headroom and even more cuts to vital capital work that people rely on and people expect us to deliver. So I'll be voting this down. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Henderson. Mayor Goff.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I think your questions and what the Deputy Mayor and Councillor Henderson have said sum it up pretty well. Look, Councillor Sayers is not arguing against the reality of climate change. It's impossible to argue against that. But as Simon Wilson said in his article the other day, opposition to climate change action has moved from denying that it exists to simply don't do anything about it. And if we're talking about affordability, if we don't do anything about it, as time goes on, the costs of climate change go up and the ability to reverse it diminish. I don't think you can say, yeah, we should do something about it, but we'll find cuts elsewhere without specifying what. Peter Gutzel has made it pretty clear, and in the officer's report, our budget's hugely tight. We're already finding big cost savings. And if you were to rely on finding cost savings, it wouldn't happen. If you were to just rely on the general rate without increasing the general rate, none of this program will come about because there isn't the money to do it. The whole point of a targeted rate is to find the funds to carry out the things that we say are critically important. And to say that it's a disguised rate, actually it's the exact opposite, Madam Chair. It's a transparent rate, just like it was with the water quality targeted rate that we passed and the natural environment targeted rate. Why do people like those things? Because they know why the rate's being struck, what it will be spent on, and that they have a guarantee that it will only be used in the areas that they want it to be used in. So this is not disguised. This is not new. This is a mechanism that the public have supported in the past purely because of its transparency. To say there are other funding tools available, green bonds, for example, green bonds are simply a form of debt raised for environmental purposes, but still debt. So what you're saying there, if you want us to use more of that, well, more debt but no more revenue. And as Councillor Henderson pointed out, if we don't have the revenue, that limits our ability to raise the debt anyway. And finally is the question of unaffordability. I'm finding that the biggest opponents to this are the people who are the wealthiest people. And for the wealthiest people to say that $1.10 a week is unaffordable, I just don't accept. Yeah, it's tougher on people on the bottom, but for most of us, it's absolutely affordable, and it's a whole lot more affordable than doing nothing and finding that the cost magnifies by 3, 4, 5 times as much, and that we actually get to the point where we can't do anything about it. So actually, it's not a case of not just denying climate change, it's are we ready to raise the funds to turn our words into actions? If we're not, why pretend that it's that we're against climate change? It's not about good intentions, it's about actions, and actions have to be funded. Thank you.
Thanks, Your Worship. Councillor Watson, your comment, please.
Yeah, thanks, Madam Chair. I guess if it's talking about action, well, I guess it's probably worth noting that since we declared the emergency, it's taken us 30 months to get to this point. By the time some of these new bus services are up and running, it'll be another 2 years, possibly 3 years. So if we're talking about action, it'll be about 5 years since declaring that emergency that something's actually happening on the ground in respect of what's being proposed here today. I certainly don't want people to confuse or have any notion that this amendment has anything to do with challenging the need for action and actually implementing this program that has been put up. I and Councillor Sayers and hopefully some other people support that absolutely. It is a priority, and we're saying it is the #1 priority. What we're putting up as an alternative, and I think one that is worthy of consideration given what happened with another targeted rate, and that's the accommodation provider targeted rate, and the trouble we've got into there, is really putting out the question as to whether a targeted rate or the general rate is the best means to fund this work that needs to be done and needs to be done quickly. A targeted rate, by definition, has a set program of works over a defined period of time. So if we take the Rodney transport rate, for instance, which deals with putting on extra bus services, it has a set time. In actual fact, if the patronage reaches a point, that targeted rate then essentially disappears because AT takes up funding. My concern is that we have a number of mechanisms now, including largely the general rate, but also in some cases targeted rates, which are going to fund basically the same sort of services, in this case bus services. And our long-term plan, as people will have seen from the LTP mix between the targeted rate and the RLTP provisions, we are putting out $3.3 billion towards public transport, $600 million on active modes. So we have a rather unusual combination of an existing targeted rate, a general rate, and then in this particular instance, then yet another targeted rate. Now, that might all be fine and dandy if this was the first targeted rate, but we all know it's not. This is just one in a series now that are being used to to fund activities which in some way really mask the true cost to the ratepayer. So currently we have a water quality targeted rate, we have a natural environment targeted rate, we have a regional fuel tax that goes towards bus services or bus provision and bus facilities also, which is probably the most significant cost in terms of targeted rates or additional charging mechanisms that we have no analysis of in terms of what that is actually costing those same poor people that some people were referring to earlier on in the piece. We also have a water care rate different from other councils that's also going up by 10% per annum for much of the next decade. Now we have the climate action targeted rate on top of that. So they're all charges to ratepayers. They're all cumulative in one way or other. And I guess what this motion says that in some respects, in this latest addition to it, there is a kind of lack of transparency in some ways. I mean, if we're talking about the shock horror of an 8% general rate increase, well, if you look at this, we've got 3.5, 2.4. If we add in the residential differential, it'll be up over 6%, following on from the 5% last time. So I think that cumulative addition of rates within a very targeted rates within a very short space of times, in my view anyway, in some ways makes the climate change targeted rate, climate action program, in some ways more vulnerable than if it's in the general rate and prioritised as an absolute priority for delivery, which is what we're suggesting in this amendment. If you have already 4 or 5 existing additional funding mechanisms that have all just come within the last 4 or 5 years, if the council's position continues to deteriorate as a consequence of not just COVID, but decisions made in terms of borrowing levels and selling off diversified assets portfolio and any number of specific decisions along the way, including 50% funding of the CRL, that puts us to where we are now. And I suspect that going forward, a targeted rate might not be the securest mechanism of safeguarding the priority of that work in a rapidly deteriorating council financial position. So if we look at this targeted rate, the lion's share of this of it is going to do with bus enhancements, over 600 million out of the billion. The bus service improvements generally are funded through that general rate. And I think what Councillor Sayers was really alluding to in a reference to that general rate is that would be his preference, and no doubt a preference of a number of people in the public, that this could be done within that current 3.5% envelope. It might well be that it isn't. We all recognise that. But that's not to say, like in the past, where we've gone out with a variation of options rather than just take this or leave it, that there is work that I assume's already been done, what the various computations would be in terms of keeping that combined targeted rate and general rate increase of over 6% to the average residential household to be lesser than that, while still maintaining the priority of the climate change action that's taken will take the best part of 5 years by the time it starts clicking in. So I think that far from being an amendment that isn't based on a sort of realistic perception of the moment, I think it does provide a transparency of cost rather than seeking to somehow pretend that having to pay a targeted rate, especially when you're doing 4 or 5 of them already, and a general rate, that somehow just doesn't add up to an overall rate increase that goes a lot more than $1.10 a week. It provides a safety of the climate action program in terms of having it prioritised within council spending as of right. It does perhaps provide the opportunity for reprioritisation within the budget. I mean, I look at the regional fuel tax spending, for instance. We're looking to gain $574 million over 10 years through this rate. The regional fuel tax within 3 years, even COVID-affected years, that spent $539 million. Now, I know the argument will be put up there, well, which projects are you taking out? The reality is that there's already been projects taken out of the regional fuel tax. Penlink has been taken up by NZTA. I don't think Mill Road's in there to any extent now either. So the reality is that things do need to be reprioritised. Things will change. So this amendment points to that need for reprioritisation, to put this sort of work first and foremost, but to be mindful of the accumulation of costs that have occurred with this raft of targeted rates that, you know, make people's rates bill now looking like, you know, reading an annotated version of War and Peace. They're lining up one after the other. So as much as they're going to good causes, that's the reality that we're looking to confront here. And we're suggesting that we can make more of an effort to reduce that cost, to make more savings, to reprioritise, to put more pressure on the people who should be leading this, and to a certain extent aren't, and that's the government. And I think even James Shaw in his commentary, more or less, although he's got to be careful, is making that same point. So a little bit like the CRL, by us jumping into the fray, and we need to jump into the fray, and we should have jumped into it long earlier, in some ways it has the perverse effect of taking the pressure off the government too, to start helping out or being more assertive than it has been to date, where its performance is less than inspiring.
Point of order, Madam Chair.
Sorry, I have a point of order.
Just for clarification, I really didn't want to interrupt Councillor Watson, but it's been over 10 minutes and I just want fairness for all times. Is that the normal? You just said 5 minutes at the beginning and I was just checking. I didn't want to interrupt, but it has been over 10, that's all.
Okay, correct. Well, nice to know I'm being timed. If that's the case, I've had my say, Madam Chair. I hope I've made my points clear, and I thank you for the opportunity to speak to that.
Thank you, Councillor. And I believe Sandra has been ringing the bell, but there's something wrong with her sound, so I didn't hear it either. Councillor Newman, comment from you, please.
Yeah, look, thanks very much. It's an interesting discussion that's being had. Look, Greg, if the wording of this had read by addition, funded through a consequential increase in the general rate, and then instead of the proposed climate action target rate, I'd support that. But it doesn't say that, and my concern is that and I mean, I know the cost savings are already coming, but the priorities for me, which are non-negotiable, but which wouldn't be protected in the amendments, is the renewals program, the fully funding depreciation, and the need to move to an equitable funding mechanism, which is going to require more money. And I think about some of the calls on the existing budget, rates funded budget, and in particular renewals, which can't be funded through contributions or other activities. And it just frustrates the heck out of me I've had to sit through many workshops where some colleagues unwisely try and game the renewals budget to pay for non-renewals related activities, which can't be done, but they still try. And too much work is going on trying to push the definition of what we can achieve within the existing rates envelope. And I just worry about the wording here, because whilst I am prepared to go out to the public for a conversation, a consultation on going above 3.5%, because I think we should be doing that. There's just not the appetite around the table for us to go out on a significantly higher rate increase proposition. What we're going to do is have it at 3.5 plus all these target rates. I mean, I take the point that John Watson's said, and he's right. I mean, when I go to the supermarket and I look, I'm not there looking primarily at the cost of laundry detergent and eggs and milk. You're sort of looking at the bottom line figure on the receipt and saying, well, how much did that all cost? And so, yeah, I mean, I don't really think that people are going to be too grateful when they look at their rate invoice and annotate it all down and say, oh, well, look, this is how much this costs and this is how much that costs. But Greg, there's no protection for the renewals for depreciation. And look, I absolutely expect that we'll be back at this again next year and the year after that. I think that the inflationary pressure will continue to eat into the council's purchasing power for its capital works and consequential OPEX. You know, I think that some of the comments that Councillor Darby's expressed around the shares in the airport are well founded, actually. But I can't support this amendment because I think that without clarification as to how the opportunity cost of the activities would be funded through the general rate, without that being acknowledged that it would require a consequential increase, I just think that to require the new activities around climate action to be absorbed within the existing general rate increase without a consequential increase in the general rates is going to be very bad for my ward. And therefore, if the amendment was, if the wording was different, to give a completely clear intent to raise the general rate beyond what is proposed, I'd be up for that. But that's not what's provided for here. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Newman. Next councillor for a whakaaro is Councillor Kuhn.
Tēnā koe, Madam Chair. Ngā mihi kia koe, Councillor Sayers. Thank you for the opportunity to discuss this. I am going to speak against it, and it's going to just cover some of the comments that have already been made, but I do feel I just need to make this point, and Councillor Newman has really covered it as well. But, you know, I'm all for an amendment and talking this through as an option for raising the general rate and for climate action for coming out of the general rate. But I think Councillor says your whakaaro has been different from that of Councillor Watson in terms of what this is actually saying and what it's doing. And it's really not clear. It's not clear whether you're saying that we would consult on having the whole program funded through the existing general rate and the proposed rates increase in the LTP, or whether it would be funded from an increased general rate. And so it's a shame that that you didn't take up the opportunity of putting through the amendment sooner, so it could actually have been worded in a way that made that really clear. And I think Councillor Newman very eloquently put it in terms of what's problematic about the amendment, because I do think it is valid to ask the question around, do we increase general rates to do this program and this very vital program? But that's not what this amendment's saying, and you and Councillor Watson seem to be saying something slightly different about the intent of the amendment. So I did just want to make that point, Madam Chair, because you did give all councillors, all members of the committee, plenty of opportunity to put forward amendments, and the Mayor's been very open to talking through everything that's in his mayoral proposal, which I'm very supportive of and look forward to it going out for consultation. And as the Deputy Mayor said, those who do answer the consultation question to say they don't support the targeted rate are effectively saying they either don't want the program of work or they want it to be funded some other way. And I hope that will be drawn out of the consultation analysis. So, I think it is all covered, and I'm hoping that I won't need to speak to the Mayor's proposal when we get to that item, because I think that his I do support it, but I will just see how that debate goes, because I appreciate everybody's wanting to move things along. And Madam Chair, you're being very generous with the time that we're having to talk over this amendment and asked Pātai on it as well. So a final point I just wanted to make too on this notion that we should just cut operational budgets when we've gone through this amazing piece of work with the recovery budget and all of the cuts that were made in the emergency budget and all that, huge amount of work that has been done, is, putting forward that there should be cuts to operational budgets without actually suggesting what they're going to be, and taking all of the expenditure for our ward areas, I just find a little bit disingenuous. And I just would love to see, we've had all these workshops, heaps of opportunity to put up what could be cut, and I haven't seen any concrete things on the table, but I think we've all had a really good opportunity to talk that through. So that's another aspect that I find problematic with this amendment and the way it's worded as well, that it's just not specific enough, not clear, and 3 councillors had to ask for clarification on it, and Councillor Alf in his question got the response that this would actually take a 2.4% general rates increase, but I don't think that's the intention of your amendment, Councillor Sayers. So that's for that reason, those reasons, I can't support it at this late stage, but would have welcomed the discussion a lot sooner and how it could have been worded differently. Thank you, Madam Chair, for that opportunity. Kia ora.
Thank you, Councillor. And I think the last comment I have is from Councillor Walker.
Sure, Madam Chair. I've got some sympathy for this amendment, particularly around the consideration of other funding tools. The concern that I have on an ongoing basis, having attended conferences, overseas with other cities and workshops and the like around climate financing and a whole range of tools that other cities employ, that we continue not to give adequate time and effort to developing those tools, irrespective of whether they're tools that we might have or tools that government might need to give us. So the consequence is that our city, compared to other cities, is falling further and further behind. And when I raised some questions around these matters, I really did not get sufficient answers. So I just want to put my ongoing concern around this issue on the table. When I look at other cities that have got dedicated climate funds, for example, to fund projects, we have none. When I find other cities like Tokyo that has got a dedicated cap and trade for its own city, for example, we give no consideration to that. And I could list off a whole range of alternatives that go to funding that we do not even bring to consideration in terms of advice from officers. So I continue to be deeply disappointed in this area, Madam Chair, because I do not think that rates generally, and general rates for that matter, or even this targeted rate as it stands, are the best match for initiatives in this space as compared to the likes of the regional fuel tax, which is somewhat appropriate, far more appropriate than anything else. But there are other tools there, Madam Chair. So that's my ongoing disappointment. I understand the sentiment that Councillor Sayers has got around much of this. I do think that we need to make a financial commitment around climate change, no question about that. The way we're doing it is not necessarily the best way. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I think you'll find that I've been more than generous, Councillor Sayers and Watson, into asking for comments. According to standing orders, I believe now that I take this to the vote. Is that correct, Sandra?
Yes, Madam Chair, it is.
Right.
So could I just procedural, if I could, I thought I might have had a right of reply, or is that not correct?
I don't think so. Sandra, is that correct? There is no right. It's standing order 1.4 something or other. I haven't got it here.
Yes, Madam Chair. Standing order 1.4.10, the mover of an original motion has a right of reply. A mover of an amendment to the original motion does not.
Right.
Thank you.
Oh, terrific. Oh, thank you for that clarification, Madam Chair, and I've really appreciated all the questions and comments from the colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you. I think I've given you pretty ample time. Right, I'll take it to the vote, though. All those in favour say aye.
By division, Madam
Chair.
By division.
I've called the vote. Sorry, Councillor.
By division, Madam Chair, you were in the process of putting the vote. You hadn't completed it.
Is that correct, Sandra?
Yes, Madam Chair, we can take a division on the amendment.
Good. Then I can see. Oh, I know who they are anyway.
Mayor, turn your microphone off. Mayor, turn your microphone off.
I have, Madam Chair. I've just turned it on again to reply.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Members are voting on the amendment, which is shown on the screen. So if you could vote yes or no when your name is called, please. Mayor Goff.
No.
Deputy Mayor Cashmore.
No.
Councillor Bartley.
No.
IMSB member Blair.
No.
Councillor Casey.
No.
Councillor Collins.
Against.
Councillor Coombe.
Against.
Councillor Cooper.
Against.
Councillor Dalton.
Against.
Councillor Darby.
Against.
Councillor Filipina.
Against.
Councillor Fletcher.
For.
Councillor Henderson.
Against.
Councillor Hills.
Against, thank you.
Councillor Mulholland.
For.
Councillor Newman.
Against. Sorry, Greg.
Councillor Sayers.
For. Thank you.
Councillor Stewart.
For.
IMSB Chair Taipari.
No.
Councillor Walker.
Against.
Councillor Watson.
For.
Councillor Young.
Sorry, no.
Chair Simpson.
No, sorry, Greg.
Thank you, Madam Chair. That is the amendment is lost, 5 votes to 18. So now we move back to the original motion, and you have the comments list.
Thank you. Right, back to the Mayor's proposal then in its original form. And the first comment I have is from Councillor Cashmore.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And thank you, Mr Mayor, for your proposal. And I do apologise for annoying you so much over the past month around trying to get an item around congestion charging included into it. Madam Chair, just before I start, to say thank you to you and my fellow councillors for all the time and effort that have been put into these budgets. You know, the past 2 years have been problematic, challenging and difficult for us all. So thank you to you personally, Madam Chair, and your deputy, and also to all the staff, the finance team especially, but to all the staff who have put input, data, resource, energy into this budget. There's no, I guess, no surprise to anyone that I don't favour targeted rates that are based on property values, and I've been consistent with that all the way through. But I do strongly support what this targeted rate is putting in place. Better transport options, more active modes, urban ngāhere, and just quite frankly, putting PT and options into communities where there are few options now. There are places in Auckland that do have good PT now, which make themselves perfectly applicable for a congestion charging or a smart transport pricing system. The Climate Change Action Programme is exciting, and I believe it goes a long way in providing better alternatives for public transport for all Aucklanders. My preference was to accelerate the introduction of a congestion charging system, which has the effect of incentivising people to change away from their cars into general public transport or active modes. However, for that to happen, the government has to put legislation in place. And I've been pushing our staff and the Crown to say, okay, can we advance this? The answer has been that there has been a universal approval, as the Mayor said, on a congestion charging system, and the different agencies of the Crown and Auckland Transport and Auckland Council have been working together collectively to deliver a program of works that the government can then put legislation to. However, it takes time, and the Mayor is logically probably correct saying it's going to be mid-25. I'd like the idea of the rollout of a congestion charge into areas which I've already said already have good PT, and then over time into other areas as the new PT services and active modes get delivered. The climate change action rate will be paid by everybody, but not fairly across everybody. And if we had a system that phases the targeted rate and the fuel tax out as the congestion charging comes in, then you got the best of both worlds. We need to deliver the capital programs, but we need to fund them in a fair and rational manner. Basing a targeted rate on capital values hits those people who are doing the most right now for climate change the hardest. I'll give you three cases in point. The first case is the steel mill in Glenbrook. Has spent literally tens of millions of dollars on mitigating its climate change measures and improving its energy systems. And yet they're going to be hit with a $20,000 additional bill. Now, it's a big business and people can afford that, but it is another straw on a business that's had a struggling time for several decades. The Quartus Hotel has likewise spent tens of millions of dollars in its recarpeting programs, its new installations, and its new 660-room hotel addition on measures that reduce heat transference out of rooms and into rooms, hold heat or expel cold, or vice versa, winter to summer. And yet they're going to be facing approximately another $10,000 a year in rates. And I'd have to tell you how much the hotel industry has been hurting during COVID. However, a consoling factor I'm seeing is that we are seeing a migration of change. I was involved when we brought in the interim transport levy back in 2015. It wasn't particularly popular, but it brought the government of the day to the table so we could land CRL and the Auckland Transport Alignment Project, which between those two items are going to be game-changing in how Aucklanders move. The interim transport levy then moved into the regional fuel tax, which is probably an effective way to raise funds for transport initiatives. But it too will have its time as we migrate out of fuels into new energy sources for cars and industries to move in. The congestion charging is obviously next cab off the rank. And as I said before, if we phase down the climate action targeted rate and the transport fuel tax, regional fuel tax, we will be in a position where we have tax neutrality and still delivering a real incentive for people to change how they travel. Congestion charging rolled out, RFT and the climate action targeted rate phased out will reduce carbon emissions and more importantly almost, free up our motorway networks, our roading arterials for reduced congestion, which will add even less carbon to the environment and improve productivity and our economy. So as for those reasons, I am supporting the climate action target rate and the Mayoral Proposal in general, so that we can start the process of delivering less carbon for Aucklanders and start the process of accentuating that via a congestion charging system that truly incentivises real change in mobility systems around Auckland. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. The second comment I have is from Councillor Cooper.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And first of all, I want to reiterate all the thanks that the Deputy Mayor gave to our staff who've worked tirelessly, and to you and the Mayor as well, in providing the workshops and everything we've had that comes to today to make the decisions to put these proposals out to our public. And first of all, I want to thank you, Your Worship, because I was very concerned on hearing of quite a high 8% rate rise. And we promised our community last year that if they accepted a 5% general rate increase, that we would go back down to 3.5%. So I applaud that is what we're putting out. Though it's a little bit ironic that a kind of a compensation for losing our water infrastructure assets is now going to pay for the groceries, as you said before. And of course, hopefully we'll get the other money going onwards, trying to deal with what we need to deal with. Of course,
we must play our part in climate change. But I do support the Deputy Mayor's comments. I'm not really sure this is the way to do it. I really support his approach, but we know we couldn't get that across the line. And so, you know, this is a practical plan, especially public transport, reducing emissions, increasing our carbon sink with planting trees. They're really practical things that our community can see we're doing. What's really important for me is that, and I've never been one to promise reducing rates. What I've always promised is to try and offer value for money. And I know the Chair of Finance, absolutely, that's her mantra as well. And I think that if people can see what they're getting for a rate, then they will support it. However, for me, it needs to show a clear community benefit, and a targeted rate must benefit everybody. That's part of the premise of it, and hopefully it isn't challenged, but we've got to really show each of our communities what they will get for that, what benefit will accrue to them. And as Councillor Watson said earlier, some of these public transport benefits won't be evident for quite some years. And so that's going to be a hard sell for people, especially in my area, especially in the northwest of Waitakere, in the eastern part. That has been really difficult. We have a metropolitan centre with no rapid transit network, and that will still not come to pass for some years, even with shovel ready. And so I'm going to be listening. I'm not a climate sceptic at all, but where my scepticism lies is the affordability for our communities. And so we don't even know what effect the revaluations will have yet, because we haven't had those back to us. But I absolutely support this going out to consultation. I cannot claim to know what my 180,000 constituents think. It's just not possible to just make that up. So I'll be looking very carefully at the feedback, very carefully at the consultation we do, the traditional consultation and the Comar Brunton polls, to see what my community think. I know a lot of them do support action for climate change. It's critical, but it's whether they can afford it. And so that's what I'll be looking at, but I do support this going up to consultation. Thank you. Thank you, Councillor, and thanks for your comments as well. Councillor Henderson, Deputy Chair.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just very briefly, it's a very exciting day, actually. Climate change was a subject to my maiden speech, as some of you might remember way back in the before times. And as you guys know, I'm a father with young kids. And I say today, as I did then, that I worry about the place that we're going to be leaving them in their generation. You know, a generation of life today that have lower quality of life than their parents, and that's every parent's nightmare. Just briefly, you know all the severe flooding and the weather issues we've had in this term, a historic drought, 2 heavy storms in the northwest. Just before, I think it might have been just before, the Newland Town Centre was underwater. We had a tornado that saw loss of life in Papatoetoe. So this sort of stuff is actually already here. We talk about planning for the future. We should be planning for the now. But the other thing about this targeted rate for climate change is not just pain. Sometimes we have to spend on significant things where the ratepayer doesn't physically see the difference. So, for example, when we increased our water infrastructure so that we actually had more reliability, that we could rely on water, no one saw the pipes. You know, you don't see that as a ratepayer every day. But in this case, we are going to see more buses. We're going to see cleaner ferries. We're going to see more trees with better air quality. It's a spend that's always been necessary anyway. It's to invest in more productive time and more time with family for those that have to commute to work, especially for our suburban areas. As I've said before, in terms of my ward, the city has currently 1 frequent bus service by AT's own definitions for 250,000 people in West Auckland, which is absolutely unacceptable. This proposal will make that 7. And finally, on some sort of par with the rest of the city, the sort of thing that the super city was supposed to be fixing a long time ago, in my view. I do want us to look a little bit at tinkering and improving the spend here, getting under the hood, and I look forward to submissions on that effect. So, for example, I think we should be running buses to places with high regional and national interest, like Piha Beach, for example. I think that in procurement, we should be looking at smaller buses to give more flexibility on suburban routes and actually options for routes into more rural areas as well. That's a very exciting future for many in our city that currently don't have those services. But I think that's a discussion for later. And I'm really excited to hear from the community on these points. But for now, and I'll wrap up here, I just want to congratulate the Mayor. I want to congratulate you, Chair of Finance, too. Fantastic. Congratulate our staff on a proposal that keeps our strategic assets. That will mean more money in the pockets of Aucklanders over the long term. A proposal that keeps our promises on keeping rates affordable, and a proposal that does what Aucklanders have actually asked us to do. I look forward to hearing from them and being led by residents in the next discussions ahead. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, Deputy Chair. I now hand over to Councillor Paul Young.
Kia ora, Madam Chair. I want to speak briefly in supporting of the proposal going out to public consultation, and in particular support for asking our Aucklanders what they're thinking about the climate action target rate. Thank you to the Mayor, Chair Simpson, and the finance staffs again for the hard work on another tough budget. Thank you to the Mayor for avoiding immediately project delays and the service cut in his proposal. That's important. We know once COVID-19 is stable, the climate crisis will be still here and getting worse. We know the hardship and the difficulty in our community. Therefore, we need to ask our Aucklanders for their feedback. However, not only through the consultation, I also recommend that everybody ask the young people in their family about the climate change. Do they know about the climate changing issues? What do they think about it? And what sort of the future do they expect? I have taken the opportunity, and I personally found it very interesting. Young people's understanding is very high. In our society, we already see many issues relating to transport, housing, and the environment. We can see the past decision maker did not solve those issues properly, and maybe they didn't have the right information. We do have information, and we know climate changing will be much worse. We want to do all we can reduce those costs and the impact on young people and the future generations. This climate change package will help start to give our city options. I do hope councillors support it going out to consultation, so we have all options available when we make our final decision on behalf of current and future Aucklanders. Kia ora, 谢谢.
谢谢. Thank you, Councillor Young. Councillor Mulholland, you're next.
Kia ora, thank you, Chair. I'd like to acknowledge His Worship the Mayor and the proposal that is before us for a decision to go to consultation with our community. I do support the proposal in principle going forward. I have commented to some degree with some of you in relation to my views on targeted rates. I think they're specific, I think they're important. In this case, I would have liked to have seen that we include climate change as an important and really an issue that I think is facing all of us. There's no doubt about it, but it should be, in my view, in the annual charges, the annual charge to our people. One of the things I do hope that our community undertake, if this decision is made to go to a full consultation, is to please give your feedback, because we do need to hear what you're saying. It is not about our personal choices, it is about what the wider community is saying. And I'll be looking not just for the general feedback that we get from council. I want to acknowledge all the staff that do work on that, but I'll be looking at other social media and other forms of communication that are out there in the public. So I will say that it has been an interesting time for me to listen to this proposal, and I do want to just acknowledge His Worship and what he has said with regards to standing by his word with regards to the 3.5%, because that is where I also stand. And so thank you for not changing that. But I do also want to comment to the fact that any targeted rate is going to be an increase, and we need to be logical and sensible around the fact that that is an increase to our people. So let the people have their say, and I will take on board the feedback that I receive from them in any form that they are willing to provide it. I still believe that we're facing an incredibly difficult time with regards to the impact of COVID and the cost of living in Auckland. So I think we do need to be sensible, and we do need to be sound in how we make decisions for this city. And it is an amazing city. It's an incredible city. And I do think that people have a right to have a voice on issues. And the issue I think that is probably top of mind is one that has been repeated here by many councillors, and that is affordability. So I'll be looking carefully at that when it comes back to us, in terms of when the feedback comes to us. Chair of Finance, Councillor Simpson, you've done a great job. Thank you for leading this. And of course, it is in difficult times. And for my community, I just want to ask you to also take the opportunity to feedback, not just on the matter of the proposed climate action targeted rate. And I do support the views and principles that we do have to do something about this. And I was very supportive of Councillor Watson's comments with regards to the amendment that was put up by Councillor Sayers. I think we need to be quite realistic in terms of timing. And by the way, I'm timing myself. I'm at 3 minutes 36. And as you will all know, I've hardly spoken during this process. So again, thanks to your worship. I will be supporting that we go to the public and listen to them. But I really want to make sure, if the climate action targeted rate is accepted by the public, that we are absolutely clear, and even during this process, absolutely clear about what that is funding. Now, whilst we can say we are, we need to be mindful to share with the public what those items of funding are, because I've already been asked, and I am happy to support that. I would have preferred a transport targeted rate, but thanks again to everyone for your work on this, and I will be supporting the proposal.
Thank you, Councillor. Next comment I have is from Councillor Watson.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. I'll try and be a bit quicker than I was last time. I just want to make it clear that I support the program of works that are going out under the climate action package. They're needed, they're vital, and an attempt has been made to make them go across the region as a whole, and I think the officers are to be commended for that. However, I do want to confine my comments to a rather small part of the Mayor's proposal in that climate action package, and it's a small part, but it's an important part, and it's the one that's got administration costs through AT at 7 million and resourcing from Auckland Council at 9 million. And despite seeking clarity on what those costs go towards, I haven't really received that. And I say that because the success or otherwise of this, of what's being labelled quite liberally here as this transformational package, is going to depend on what those small costs actually amount to in terms of promotion of these services that are being put on for people. Last week, less than a week ago, in fact, we heard when we were discussing the transport emissions reduction plan that that an intentional program of intervention through social marketing, campaigns, events and community engagement is critical to help shift social norms. So that's critical, not important or not desirable, but critical. So I want to know if that package of 7 million includes the type of intervention that is required to actually get people going on those buses, as opposed to the buses Councillor Henderson talked about going by, which I see in some parts of my ward, without too many people on them. Why should I say that? Well, I say that because Auckland Transport's own research indicates that more than half of all Aucklanders perceive that public transport does not go to where they need to go, but this has not been tested against the real options available currently. It is likely many Aucklanders have an out-of-date perception of the PT options available to them. And what does that mean in real words? It means it doesn't take into account the radical restructuring of the city's bus services between 2016 and 19. So we've already been through a transformational period in terms of putting on public transport services, but the take-up based on Auckland Transport's own research, despite the growth in patronage, I'll be the first to acknowledge that, and that's great. But if we have over half of Aucklanders not even realising that there's public transport options to them or what those public transport options are in terms of services, we've got a real problem. So there will be nothing transformational in the uptake unless that climate action package that goes to admin costs and resourcing has a very vigorous and well-resourced component to it that is informing the public, but not just informing them, it's encouraging them. The Mayor referred earlier on to the example within my own ward of Millwater, where there was a phenomenal 44% increase in patronage in the first 3 weeks. That was from 3,500 people to over 5,000 people through that sort of intervention. So unless this package has that aggressive intervention, then we are going to be disappointed, because the main thing that has to come out of that is people changing their behaviour and taking a bus or a train or a ferry. If that doesn't happen, then all we have is another kind of utopia, that Aussie political bureaucratic satire where we have a big policy announcement and a big judgment, a big budget that goes with it, but not the consequential change in behaviour. So for me, that is the real challenge, to make this transformational in the way it needs to happen. Similarly, along those lines, I would like, as part of this package, is to have a far more personal pitch across the region as a whole to people to reduce their vehicle kilometre travels on a personal basis. And we need to do that, because if we look at the latest census data as far as Auckland goes, journey to work, our public transport share was 10.7%, and even with that massive restructuring of the bus network, it only went up 1.1% between 2013 and 2018. Wellington, by contrast, is 18%, and getting close towards double. And if we go to international cities like Vienna, which has a population not too dissimilar to Auckland, but has a PT uptake of nearly 40%. So why do I bring those examples up? Well, our time and the clock is ticking. If we're to reduce our transport emissions by 64%, by the time these bus improvements come in, we'll have about 6 years to do that, based on the current figures. So our time is ticking by really quickly. So if this is to be as genuinely transformational as we're suggesting today, that communication package needs to go to another level, way beyond anything we've done before, perhaps similar to the COVID-19 push. And we need to get into our communities, and we need to make people take advantage of the offering and to challenge them personally, to contribute personally to reducing their own vehicle kilometres travelled. Without that double combination, then I think we will fall short of the mark. But I commend the people that have been involved in putting this together. It's now over to us to support our current public transport network in Auckland, which has had billions and billions of dollars invested in it, to support it, to encourage people to use it right now and not be waiting 2 or 3 years down the track for these bus services and whatnot to kick in. A lot of these changes should and could be happening right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Our next councillor is Councillor Fletcher.
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair. And I'd like to start by confirming, as I indicated to the Mayor at the workshop that we had the other day, is that I think it is a really important time for us to go up for consultation, and therefore I will be supporting this going out for consultation. I was a bit cynical last year when we were discussing the LTP, because everyone was talking about how hard it is. But today, it is hard. We live in an age where there's absolutely no certainty about everything. For those who sat through the audit committee yesterday, amongst the long list of risks, you know, the fare box and the mayor's referred to some of these today, the issues around profitability of the Auckland airport, the reduction of use of council facilities, staff costs, wage pressures, construction costs, escalations, inflation and interest rates. You know, the list goes on and on and on. And I don't think anybody, in terms of trying to read the tea leaves, knows yet where we're going to end up this time next year. So it is a time, I think, for some caution, but it's a time to actually consult genuinely with the public. My support for allowing this to go up for consultation is not necessarily around the whole package. I regret that we're not going out, as I understood the wording that Councillor Watson and Councillor Sayers had. I would have liked an option where we could have addressed the climate change issues, but perhaps through the general rate. I'm not sure that would have done too much harm. We've got a bit of a power imbalance at times in that not all councillors have access to the same numbers of officers and helping them craft things. And I took their opportunity for us to consider their amendment in good faith. And I don't, you know, I can see that we can still have some meaningful feedback from the consultation, but there may be those that are opposed to targeted rates, and I would have liked to have given those folk more of an opportunity for expression. In sitting here, I'm not wanting to speak just as an elected member for Albert Eden Puketapapa. I think all of us should be sitting here today thinking regionally. You know, this, of all the times that we should be thinking regionally and not just ward-based, is today. And I'm very pleased that the Mayor has responded to the pleas of some of us. I mean, I fought for congestion charging over the last 20 years. It has annoyed me intensely, the issue of thinking that somehow you can just use property tax and rates to change people's behaviours and nonsense. So I think that we've got the opportunity now, as I have understood the new D under 2D, that we can reassess these things. That doesn't mean that we don't put the pedal down in terms of trying to push the government a little bit faster. A lot of politicians have come very grudgingly to the issue of congestion charging, but I think it is part of our future, and the sooner we get to it, the better. I would like to acknowledge staff through our CEO. He's our one employee, Jim Stabeck. I know that Jim has endeavoured as best he can to make sure there are an array of options available to us, and we'll probably go into a little bit more detail on that on the next agenda item. But I would like to conclude in terms of encouraging the people of Auckland to actually, I know they're suffering from consultation fatigue. You know, we ask so much of them in terms of responding, but now is the time for them to engage in this. This is the first step on the journey. It will come back, it will go out for public feedback, and I hope that people don't just jump on the bandwagon of one particular issue, that they actually engage and understand that we are, all of us, trying our very best in these trying circumstances to try and keep Auckland on a steady footing. And I'm particularly encouraged by the commitment that the Mayor has made today that we are going to continue in terms of that objective of full capital depreciation. That really is a plus. Finally, Madam Chair, I'd like to acknowledge you. Stan, the late Stan Lawson would be very proud of you today. I think you have managed the process very well, and I commend you for it, and I hope that others can support the consultation of this document going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Fisso-Collins.
Kia ora, Chair, and thanks. I'll start where Councillor Fletcher left off. I just wanted to say thank you. I think this process has been really good, and you and your very able finance team have been excellent at getting answers turned around and looped in, and I've had so much to read over the last little while that it's been really informative. I want to say thanks to the Mayor. I think these are challenging times, and we all respect that, and I think the Mayor's been able to find a really honest and genuine balance in his proposal, so well done to the Mayor, and for keeping your door open so that you can have pretty robust conversations. I think back to one of our workshops where there was a bit of banter between yourself and the Deputy Mayor, which I really enjoyed, and seeing the change and the amendment that's come through that really robust conversation is really useful. So it was fun to watch, to both Mayor and Deputy Mayor. I know you're both listening, and so thanks for that entertainment, but thanks also for the display of respect, because I think we can have really tough conversations that are held in a very respectful manner. As far as the proposal going to public consultation, my desire remains that we get our communities involved, and I know that the engagement team that Kenneth will be leading have come back with some really good ideas. We've seen an increase in the engagement from more poorer communities, minority communities, our youth, Rainbow, Pacific, disabled communities, and we've heard from some of those diversity panels as well. And I think whilst I agree with Councillor Fletcher, there is a bit of consultation fatigue. It's really important that we continue to work with those communities and those sectors that don't normally come back to us with their feedback, that are so busy providing meals for their families and making sure that there's a roof over people's heads, that this isn't one of their priority things, that they don't have the time for. So I'm interested in how we continue to ensure that we get a wide range of Auckland's diverse communities and Auckland voices participating in this. I'm going to watch the climate action targeted rate with interest, and I think somehow or other we do have to meet this cost. And my personal position is that it's good that we're consulting on the targeted rate. And I have to agree with the Mayor. It feels like it's those who are poorest and most affected are the ones who seem to be most willing to pay. And just on that, I wanted to advise people that in the last COVID-affected kind of 18 months, we have seen remittances to Samoa increase by $12 million. And what that shows is that people here in New Zealand and families in Australia continue to use whatever resource they have to support the families back home. And remittances across the board in the Pacific have actually risen by 1.7%. So that's a whole lot of money from families who don't have a lot still prepared to give to those back home. So I actually think we'll be quite surprised by what some of the more vulnerable communities have to say with regard to the climate action targeted rate. And just finally, I think Councillor Watson had a great idea of the around the airport shares. I found that discussion, we had a couple of workshops on this, so I found the discussion really intriguing. I thought it was a fascinating discussion, although there were times where I wondered about motivations for that discussion. And that's just my own personal observation from what I heard in that discussion, but I'm glad it was before us. It was pretty robust, and I enjoyed the way the Mayor held a very firm position, and he sought a mandate on it, got it, and then Councillor Watson had the idea of if people wanted to do otherwise, they could do something similar in a year's time. So I wanted to just reflect on that for a moment and say, way to go, big ups, props to the good people of Manukau who retained those shares, bought them in, and we're benefiting as a city from the dividends that we get from those shares. And yeah, it's been challenging. The airport's been shut down and it's just starting to kind of find its feet again. So there's been challenges in the way we've received dividend, but I think it's an investment that has a long-term benefit for all of Aucklanders. So I'm glad to support the mayoral proposal as it stands, and I look forward to hearing from all the voices of Auckland as to what they think. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor Hills, you're next.
Got a Chair, and thank you. And thank you to you, your deputy, the Mayor for all the work on this. I think coming back from parental leave, that first workshop when it seemed like the rates would have to go up to 8% or more, and there was going to be significant cuts to operating budgets again, and I'm sure staff were concerned about the pain that was taken in the last, or the first budget after the outbreak of COVID began in 2020. So I feel a lot better that the budget we are sitting here to go out to consultation doesn't have the large cuts and the cuts to staff and the more pressure right across Tāmaki Makaurau on the services that Aucklanders expect, and the services that Aucklanders have shown they will keep flocking to when they're able to. And so I'm glad this is protecting all the things we love, whether it's our parks, our libraries, our community centres, the grants to our volunteer groups, and all the public transport, despite the drop-off due to COVID, is still keeping there for the people who need it most. So I'm glad that you have all been able to put together a budget that resembles something that looks quite different than a few weeks ago. It was looking quite stark. So, we talk a lot about the climate part of this budget, but I think the rest of it, considering what we were facing or what we thought we could be facing, is quite a considerable improvement. So thank you. Just also want to thank the staff for putting this together. I know the Sustainability Office and the Auckland's Council's Transport team and Auckland Transport have done a huge amount of work on what I think is a transformational billion-dollar budget. And for those who don't like, the climate change label, and I think it might have been Councillor Mulholland who said this maybe should be a public transport rate anyway, because this is our bread and butter. This is significant. This is public transport services. This is new ferries where our ferries are failing us. We need replacement boats across the network, but to have them EV is really crucial. The urban canopy and forest is something that we should be doing as well. And I think I said it last week, this sort of zips into finally with the transport emissions reduction plan work we've been working on. It starts making those big moves that we've all said that we have to do, that we've all passed under Te Taraki a Tāwhiri, and what the community is expecting us to do. Of course, we do not want to charge people more, but the issue is if we keep kicking the can down the road, this cost is going to rise and rise and rise. And we know where we have provided services that people have flocked to them, and with, petrol prices going up 30 or 40 cents in the last couple of months alone, and things becoming more expensive and more difficult to drive, we are going to have to provide these services for people, and the walking and cycling too, when you consider more than 50% of our trips are under 6 kilometres, and that's where the emissions is coming from. So this is a budget for Tāmaki Makaurau. It protects the services that our residents expect us to provide for them, but it also puts quite a rapid investment into public transport, walking and cycling. So I'm keen to hear Aucklanders' views, because we cannot keep ignoring this problem of climate change, but also the accessibility. This will allow 170,000 more Aucklanders to be within 500 metres of a public transport, a frequent public transport route, and this affects over 70 services, meaning 1 million people have access to these new improved routes, and that's just the public transport. So just want to say congratulations to everyone, and I hope Aucklanders who have been through a very, very tough time, tougher than the rest of the country, but obviously we've all been through this together, that they speak up and tell us how or what we should be doing in this space. And if it's not the right time, they'll tell us, but we know that they've been telling us in big numbers that it's been the right time decades ago on climate. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillors, I'm very conscious of the time we have taken. We probably should do a break at 2, but I will try and keep going. I hope some of you are able to keep listening and have a wee break. But I have Councillor Bartley and Councillor Stewart. I'll give a brief comment and hand back to the Mayor, and then we will take lunch. So, Councillor Bartley, you're next.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I definitely support this mayoral proposal going out for consultation, and I acknowledge the Mayor, the Deputy Mayor, yourself as Chair of the committee, Councillor Henderson as Deputy Chair of the committee, and the Team Auckland approach that you've consistently taken throughout this whole process. I want to quote something on my Facebook cover photo. Those of you that are my Facebook friends and the ones that I've unfriended probably won't see it. But the quote goes, "It is a cruel jest to say to a bootless man that he should lift himself by his own bootstraps. It is even worse to tell a man to lift himself by his own bootstraps when somebody is standing on the boot." And that's how I see the changes that we're trying to propose regarding regarding switching to public transport when you don't have the alternate options available to you, and putting in place congestion charges. And, you know, we've done the fuel tax, and for some people they have no other option besides driving, and they're already in, you know, jobs that they're struggling to provide for their families. So I see what's proposed here is trying to address that issue and alleviate that issue. I see it as where we want to take our city and trying to not leave anybody behind. I've heard so much in this particular proposal about low-income families, low-income communities, and that's really good to hear because you don't hear it very often. So I'm glad that we're not taking a token approach to equity or, you know, the voiceless, the ones that won't be submitting, they won't be going on a webinar, they won't be in a residents association putting through their views. They're just struggling and trying to get by. And people say it's hard times, you know, because of COVID. It's hard times forever for a lot in our city. And, you know, they probably won't even take notice of this budget, but what it's going to try and implement will hopefully benefit their lives, because that is what we're trying to do, is make Auckland, make all Aucklanders able to be part and contribute to society, access opportunities, and have the chance to develop to their full potential. I want to pick up on the tree canopy. I think that's pretty cool. I grew up in Mangere. We didn't have trees in our street. I actually first saw a tui in a tree when I moved to Glen Innes because they had native trees. So I'm really glad to see that we're going to try and balance that out now with the tree canopies to those low-income areas, even in GI too. With the tree canopy, climate action rate, I just think the public already told us do something about climate, and now we've got to find a way to pay for it. It makes sense that it is through this rate, but good to take that out for public consultation. It's walking the talk to our climate action plan. In terms of the airport shares, maths is not my strong point, but I don't get it. If you're making money from something, why would you sell it? And then I Googled the airport shares in our past, and people in Manukau are so proud that they didn't sell their shares. And in one article I read, it said, grow our future, don't sell it. So it'll be good to go out for public consultation on this, because you're probably going to hear the same message again anyway. What else? Walk the talk, climate action. Yeah, I think that's pretty much my main points I want to say about this budget. But thanks to the staff for their work in putting this together. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Stewart, your comment, please.
Thank you. I won't be taking up too much time, but I also would like to thank the Mayor, and I'd like to thank you. I'm doing what everybody else does. I'm going to thank you, Desley. I think you've done a really superb job, and I'd like to also thank all the staff. It's been very difficult for them working in the conditions that we are, but I also wanted to speak about, and I was going to do it a bit earlier, and I think Councillor Filipaina and I were going to put a recommendation, but thankfully the Mayor is wanting to not consult on selling the airport shares, but just in Sir Barry Curtis's words, you know, the super duper Auckland City Council would have been in really struggle streets if it hadn't have been for Auckland Council and Manukau Council keeping their airport shares when all the other councils sold these, and they had a big knees up Mother Brown and they purchased a whole lot of things. And I remember being on the Manukau Council at the time that Sir Barry Curtis and all the councillors around the table, and that was including Councillor Al Filipaina, we knew that we couldn't have a big knees up. We needed to have that money for this new super duper city, and thank goodness we kept that money. And I think everybody's benefited from it. And I do hope that you all remember that for us in the Auckland City and the Manukau, that when it comes to spending a little bit of money some of the time, it would be nice to have some of it come back our way, because we went without an awful lot of things to make sure that everybody else could have the things that they've actually got and achieved. So thank you. And thank you, Desley. I really do appreciate everything you've done for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Darby. Councillor Darby, were you on?
I think it's off mute now.
Yep.
Thank you. Good. Thank you. Look, thanks to you, Chair, and Mayor, and all of us and the staff for getting us this far. We've got a way to go, of course, and there's a lot that's going to happen over the next couple of months. But generally, I just want to express my support for the investment package that is supported by this budget, and the climate change or climate action targeted rate, that package generally. But I also note that I think many of us have been calling for this for 5 years or more. But I don't have a fundamental, questions about the investment package supported by the budget allocations here. It's probably more around how we are revenuing things to support that expenditure. I do note, though, that the climate action targeted rate does not really have a lot of teeth, and I think we all need to recognise this. It doesn't really have a lot of teeth until about 2026, if you read the detail, because for the next 2 years, the RLTP is in place, and it's not going to be refreshed until mid-24. So the Waka Kotahi co-funding, their FAR rates for any additional programs generally can't be ignored. We're running on our own, which is not a good way of, implementing more bus services with the bill being fully paid for by council. We just are going to have to wait until that RLTP is revised. So too with the ferry procurement strategy, that's not actually confirmed at Auckland Transport yet. So that has to get over the line, and then it has to get Waka Kotahi funding before we can actually get co-funding for the procurement of new low-emission ferries. So that's one point I do want to make, just a bit of a reality check. Support the urban ngāhere plan as well. And I am focusing more on the climate action targeted rate component of the overall budget, because it's a much bigger budget. But do stress with the urban ngāhere program. We're going to have to start monitoring our planting. We're not doing that. We've already planted millions of trees. We're not monitoring those. All we do is we rely on a 3-year maintenance contract, and then we walk away. Now, that is a fact. So we have to rectify that. Otherwise, we're going to appear to be doing good, digging holes, planting trees, and just thousands of them die because we don't follow up. It worries me also that we're planting trees and we continue to lose so many trees due to development and the lack of any signals from government that is really taking the loss of urban tree canopies seriously. No evidence of that in a recent bill, but I won't go into the detail there. Looking ahead, there's a real rough road ahead over the next few months. For this budget, we're not getting anything on the cost overruns, and there will be cost overruns on 2 big projects, the City Rail Link and the Central Interceptor. Everything else in the construction sector is running riot with escalation, and it just absolutely, I just cannot work out why we have not got any early signals from the CRL company. I'm surprised that they could not bring us something at this stage on the escalation there, but I would be readying for a couple of $100 million at least on one, if not, both of those. So I guess I would stress it's time to really put our foot down with government, and I know we've got a very willing Minister of Transport to have this discussion, but I am not prepared to just keep carrying the can at 51% funding assistance rates for the RTN projects, the rapid transit projects that mirror the motorways of Auckland that should be funded 100% from council. Now, I know Mayor and myself and Bill, Deputy Mayor, have been having conversations with the Minister about that, and we do have good listening there with the Minister. I won't mention the airport shareholding, Chair. I think be a red rag to a bull. But we do need to have a discussion maybe later on about understanding, the imperatives of the ownership and understand why we why we have this ownership, rather than, I'm for and I'm against selling, etc. So look, my willingness here today extends to supporting this budget and to hear from Aucklanders, put it out for consultation. I am very cognizant of targeted rates going from, in the first year, from 127 million up 173 million. That's water quality, natural environment, city centre targeted rates, bids, and even the Rodney transport rate. So I'm getting a bit nervous about those targeted rates, as some of the councillors are expressing, but let's see what the public say. I'm also mindful of the impacts on the public at the moment. So a lot of this budget reset is due to inflationary pressures we're experiencing. The people of Auckland are also experiencing those inflationary pressures. They are seeing it in the debt repayments that they have to pay. They're seeing it in the food that they have to pay. And if you go to the supermarket, you can see just runaway price increases in your supermarket shopping. That hurts everyone. The fuel prices are at record highs as well, and rent increases are going up on the back of skyrocketing house prices. So our residents, they can't hedge like we can. They just juggle the bills, pay the bills. Let's go out there and see what they say and see what they are prepared to pay and for what. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Look, I don't think I've got any other councillor. I'm just checking. I've got no other councillor wanting to make a comment. Right, I'll just make a quick comment then from my own perspective, the penultimate comment before I hand back to the Mayor for your final comments. Look, I want to start by saying, along with everybody else, thank you to Team Auckland, for once again putting in the mahi and attending, contributing and participating on what's been actually just under 30 hours already discussing our financial situation and budget pressures. To Peter, to you and the team, thank you very much. I know that the support that you've put together for all the questions that we have asked as councillors and with the Mayor as well has been significant, so thank you to that. Look, people, our biggest challenge, climate change aside, continues to be the long-term impact of COVID. Our latest and longest ever lockdown, along with the various other impacts of COVID, has again, seriously affected our revenue, debt, and the costs associated with what we do. As we look ahead, there are many unknowns. Our financial prudence to date has ensured that those unknowns have so far been mitigated fairly well. And I say that not just from my own perspective, but clearly backed by our credit rating agencies and their continued confidence in the way Auckland Council has managed its finances. But the challenges have not gone away. Financial prudence and a budget that maintains the confidence of both Aucklanders and our external monitoring agencies is something we need to continue to deliver on. The budget year we're looking at doesn't start at all actually until the 1st of July next year. And over the next few months, we will see the likes of interest rates moving higher, inflation increasing, and the effects of Christmas spend all impacting on our communities across Tamaki Makaurau. By the time we actually go out for consultation, some of that will become clearer. It's the Mayor's job to put together a budget for our consideration. He has, without doubt, pulled a significant rabbit out of the hat in confirming that we will receive $127 million cash from the government, pretty much with no strings attached. That in itself is equivalent to a 6.5% rates increase, or more than the total residential rates collected from any one of our local board areas last year. And Mayor, How you did it, I'll never know. I told you to look at some options, but I never thought you'd come up with this one. But I have to say, I'm still nervous. I'm still really nervous about how we're going to do what we want to do. And I'm still unsure as to the impact of more COVID variants on an Auckland population that may be close to being fully vaccinated now, but we will all need a booster before the 1st of July next year. There are plenty of other uncertainties too, including we still don't know from central government whether they will keep putting that tax bill on us of 30 mil for this year. We still haven't had that in writing that that's going to go away. And that nervousness and an intimate knowledge of the problem we have within our income, our debt and our expenditure challenges was the reasoning behind the vote, behind my voting against for the one formal amendment that was not specifically clear as to its impacts. And I want to make that very clear. So on the climate target rate, look, I love that it supports the rollout of public transport to parts of the city underserved. It's all very well to promote public transport and lowering our carbon emissions, but if we have parts of Auckland that have no choice but to use